Story 1. The locked attic. Emma had always loved the idea of working abroad. A year in France as an au pair seemed like the perfect chance to see the world while gaining experience. When she first arrived at the LeBlanc household, tucked away in a quiet countryside village, it seemed idyllic. The family was warm and welcoming, or at least, they appeared to be. The parents, Jean and Isabelle, lived with their 2 children in a sprawling old farmhouse. The children, Camille and Louis, were polite but quiet, the kind of children who seemed older than their years. Emma quickly grew fond of them, especially since they clung to her with a strange sort of need, as if desperate for her attention. On her first night, Jean showed Emma to her room at the far end of the upstairs hallway. As he gave her the brief tour, he paused in front of a heavy wooden door. It looked older than the rest, reinforced with black iron hinges. Jean's face grew tense. "This door," he said firmly, "is never to be opened. The attic is off limits, do you understand?" Emma nodded, taken aback by his sudden sternness. Isabelle echoed the warning at dinner later, adding that the attic was unsafe. "Old beams, loose floorboards," she explained with a forced smile. "It's dangerous. Promise us you won't go up there." Emma promised, though the warning stirred something uneasy in her. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat in bed reading. The house was quiet, the only sound the wind whistling through the countryside. Then she heard it faint scratching, like claws dragging across wood, coming from the ceiling above her. She froze, listening harder. The scratching grew louder, joined by a low, dragging thud, as though something heavy was being pulled across the attic floor. Her heart raced. Mice, she told herself. Old houses were always full of them. But when the scratching gave way to a whispering sound, in hushed voices weaving in and out of each other, she pulled the blanket up to her chin and squeezed her eyes shut until sleep finally came. The next morning, she asked the children if they'd ever been in the attic. Camille, the older one, went pale. Louis only shook his head. "We're not supposed to talk about it," Camille whispered, then quickly changed the subject. Over the next week, the noises continued. Scratching, dragging, and sometimes worst of all, the rattling of the attic door, as though something on the other side was trying to force it open. Emma avoided walking near it at night, her stomach knotting whenever she passed. One afternoon, while the parents were out shopping, Emma tucked the children in for their naps. She lingered in the hall, staring at the attic door. She had sworn she wouldn't break the rule, but curiosity clawed at her. She needed to know what was behind it. Quietly, she slipped into Jean and Isabelle's bedroom. She rummaged through drawers until she found a small iron key. Her hand trembled as she slid the key into the lock. With a slow, reluctant click, the door creaked open. A wave of stale, suffocating air drifted out, carrying a faint, rotten smell. The narrow staircase groaned under her weight as she climbed. Dust swirled in the slanted beams of sunlight filtering through cracks in the roof. At first glance, the attic looked empty, just old trunks, broken furniture, and cobwebs. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw the back wall. Chains were bolted into the floor, their ends frayed and chewed as though something had struggled against them. Deep scratches marred the wooden beams. A chair lay splintered in the corner, gnawed to the frame. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just storage, this was a cage. Her stomach turned as she backed toward the stairs. That was when she heard Ita wet, rasping inhale from the shadows. She froze. Something was there, just beyond the reach of the light. She ran, she bolted down the steps, slammed the attic door shut, and locked it, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the key. She stuffed it back where she had found it and pretended nothing had happened, but she knew something was wrong. Something was living in that attic. That night, the sounds were worse than ever. The scratching turned to pounding, the whispers rising into fevered voices. Emma lay awake, tears in her eyes, as the door at the end of the hall shook violently in its frame. The next day, Jean returned earlier than expected and found her pale and restless in the kitchen. His eyes narrowed. "You went in, didn't you?" Emma stammered, but her silence gave her away. Isabelle's face darkened, and she shook her head. "We told you not to." Before Emma could react, Jean grabbed her wrist, his grip unstrung. The children stood in the doorway, their faces blank, as though this had happened before. Jean dragged Emma down the hall, ignoring her screams. Isabelle followed, her expression cold, resigned. At the attic door, he unlocked it. The stench was overpowering now, fetid and wet. "No," Emma cried, thrashing against his hold. "Please, don't." But Jean shoved her inside. She stumbled onto the dusty floor, the door slamming shut behind her. The lock clicked. The shadows stirred. From the corner came the sound of chains dragging, then snapping free. Something shifted into the lighter, gaunt figure. its skin stretched tight over bones, its mouth torn wide into a permanent grin. Its eyes gleamed with hunger. Emma's scream tore through the attic, echoing into the countryside, and then there was silence. When the LeBlanc family sat down to dinner that night, Camille and Louis smiled for the first time in weeks. Their parents served the meal. Speaking of ordinary things, upstairs in the locked attic, the scratching began again, this time in a new voice. Story 2. The mirror in the nursery. Sarah had dreamed of living in London ever since she was a teenager. When she landed an au pair position with the Wellingtons, a wealthy family in Kensington, she thought she'd struck gold. A beautiful home, generous pay, and only one child to care for, a 2-year-old girl named Emily. On her first day, Mrs. Wellington showed Sarah around the house. The nursery caught her eye immediately. It was charming cream walls, shelves of stuffed animals, and in the corner, a massive gilded mirror nearly as tall as the room itself. "It's been in my husband's family for generations," Mrs. Wellington explained when she noticed Sarah staring. "We thought it added character." Sarah didn't argue, though the mirror unsettled her. Its surface was too dark, almost oily, like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. Emily was sweet but unusually quiet for her age. She rarely babbled or cried, but she often sat cross-legged on the floor facing the mirror, giggling. Sarah assumed it was just toddler imagination. "Who are you talking to, love?" Sarah asked one morning as she tidied the toys. Emily pointed at the glass. The lady. Sarah glanced at the reflection. Only the two of them stared back. She forced a laugh, of course, the lady. But that night, as Sarah passed the nursery on her way to bed, she heard giggles. She opened the door to find Emily standing before the mirror in the dark. "Emily," Sarah whispered. The toddler turned, her face pale in the moonlight. "The lady says she wants to play with you." Sarah's stomach tightened. She scooped Emily into her arms, shutting the nursery door firmly behind them. The next morning, she told Mr. and Mrs. Wellington what Emily had said. They smiled politely but brushed it off. "Children her age are full of fantasies," Mr. Wellington said. Still, Sarah couldn't shake her unease. Days passed, and the mirror became harder to ignore. Sometimes, while folding laundry, she'd catch movement in its shadows that didn't match her own. Other times, she swore she saw a pale figure standing just behind Emily's reflection, too tall and thin to be anyone in the house. One evening, Sarah lingered in the nursery after Emily fell asleep. The mirror's surface shimmered faintly in the lamplight. For a moment, Sarah thought she saw her own reflection smile. Though she hadn't, she fled the room, her pulse racing. That night, she dreamt she was trapped inside the mirror, pounding against the glass while a woman with hollow eyes stroked Emily's hair on the other side. The dream left her rattled, but the reality was worse. A week later, she woke to faint footsteps outside her bedroom. She assumed it was Emily sleepwalking and hurried to the nursery. The door was ajar. Inside, Emily stood before the mirror, pressing her small hands against the glass. "Sweetheart, what are you doing?" Sarah whispered, approaching carefully. Emily didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the mirror, where a pale hand was reaching out toward hers. Sarah froze. The hand was not Emily's. In a surge of panic, she grabbed Emily and yanked her back just as the hand brushed the surface of the glass. The reflection warped, rippling like water. For an instant, Sarah saw a face gaunt, smiling, its lips moving silently as if speaking. Emily screamed, not in fear but in protest. "You hurt her," she sobbed, wriggling in Sarah's arms. "The lady is my friend." Sarah clutched the trembling child and backed out of the room, slamming the door shut. The next morning, she tried again to tell the Wellingtons. This time, Mrs. Wellington's face hardened. "Sarah, with respect, I think you're overreacting. Emily has had this mirror her entire life. It's harmless. Please don't upset her." Sarah bit her tongue, but inside she was boiling with dread. 2 nights later, during a storm, the house lost power. Rain lashed the windows, thunder cracked overhead, and the halls were plunged into shadows. Sarah lit a candle and checked the nursery. Her blood ran cold. Emily's bed was empty. Heart hammering, Sarah turned toward the mirror. Emily stood before it, barefoot in her nightdress. This time, the surface wasn't reflective. It shimmered like black water, and from within, 2 pale hands had already pulled Emily halfway through. "No," Sarah cried. Rushing forward, she grabbed Emily's arms and pulled with all her strength. Something on the other side pulled back, claws digging into Emily's shoulders. The little girl wailed in pain. With a desperate scream, Sarah yanked harder. Emily tumbled free, and the mirror's surface snapped back into cold glass. But Sarah's relief died instantly. The reflection staring back was wrong. She was holding Emily, but the Sarah in the glass was still being dragged into the dark. Her face was twisted in terror, her fists pounding silently against the glass from the other side. The figure in the mirror grinned, tightening its grip on the other Sarah. Sarah staggered backward, clutching Emily. Her reflection did not follow. The storm knocked out power for the rest of the night. By dawn, the mirror looked normal again, but Sarah didn't. She couldn't look into it without seeing herself still trapped. Screaming silently, begging for release, the Wellingtons returned later that morning, scolding her for letting Emily sleep in her bed. Sarah tried to explain what had happened, her voice trembling, but the parents only exchanged a look of pity. That evening, Mrs. Wellington tucked Emily into bed. "Did you have fun with Sarah today?" she asked. Emily smiled sweetly, pointing at the mirror. "Yes, she's still playing inside." Mrs. Wellington frowned, glancing at the glass. For the briefest second, she thought she saw movement there. Sarah's face, pale and twisted, pressed against the inside of the mirror, but she said nothing. That night, the house was quiet, except for Emily's soft giggles in the nursery. Story 3. The man in the garden. Mia had never been further from home. She had taken a year-long au pair position in rural Australia, working for a widowed father named Daniel and his 2 children, Ella and Sam. The property was vast, with acres of land stretching into dense bushland. The house itself sat alone, surrounded by a wide backyard with a swing set and a garden that always seemed a little overgrown. At first, Mia loved the quiet. The nights were alive with the sounds of crickets and frogs, and the children warmed to her quickly. But after a week, the stillness began to feel different to heavy, as though the land itself was listening. The first time she noticed him was late one evening. She was washing dishes while the children colored at the kitchen table. Through the window, she glimpsed movement near the tree line at the edge of the yard. A tall, thin figure stood there, just far enough away that she couldn't make out details. He didn't move, didn't wave, just stood, facing the house. Her heart jumped, she blinked, and he was gone. She told herself it was her imagination, a trick of the dusk. The next day, while playing in the yard, Ella pointed toward the garden. "That's where the man stands," she said casually. Mia froze. "What man?" "The man in the garden," Sam answered matter-of-factly. "He comes at night. He watches." Mia forced a smile. "Oh, you mean a scarecrow?" The children shook their heads in unison. "No, he smiles." That night, Mia locked all the doors and tried to sleep. But sometime past midnight, she awoke to a soft tapping sound. She crept to the window and pulled back the curtain. A figure stood in the yard, tall and gaunt, its head tilted upward. Even in the dark, Mia saw the gleam of teeth and impossibly wide grin. He raised one hand and dragged it slowly down the glass of the patio door, leaving a long streak of dirt. Mia gasped, stumbling back. By the time she turned on a light, the yard was empty. In the morning, she told Daniel what she'd seen. His face tightened, but he shook his head. Probably just some drifter passing through. People cut across the land sometimes, but the way he avoided her eyes made her uneasy. That evening, she checked the patio door. Faint smears of dirt were still there. Over the next nights, the figure returned. Sometimes she saw him by the swing set, swaying slightly as if waiting. Other times, he loomed closer, standing near the window, that grotesque grin stretching wider each time. The children never seemed afraid. One night, Mia heard them whispering to each other in their beds. "He wants us to come play," Ella giggled. "He says it's our turn," Sam whispered back. Mia's blood ran cold. On the 4th night, she woke to silence so heavy it pressed against her ears. She checked the children's room and found their beds empty. Panic surged through her. She ran to the back door and flung it open. The children stood barefoot in the yard, holding hands, and between them towered the man. His frame was skeletal, his skin stretched so tight across his face that his smile looked carved. His long fingers rested lightly on the children's shoulders. "Ella, Sam," Mia screamed. She bolted toward them, but in the blink of an eye, the man was gone, leaving the children swaying in place, glassy-eyed. They blinked at her as if nothing had happened. The next day, Mia begged Daniel to listen. "There's someone out there. He's coming for the kids." Daniel's expression was grim, his voice flat. "He's always been here, since their mother passed." "What do you mean?" Mia demanded, horrified. "He wants them. He won't stop until he has them," Daniel said quietly, almost like a confession. "I thought if we ignored him, he'd leave." Mia's stomach twisted. "You can't be serious. We have to go to the police." Daniel shook his head. "It won't matter. You can't stop him." That night, Mia decided she wouldn't let it continue. While the children slept, she set up Daniel's old camera by the window. its red light blinking as it recorded the backyard. She stayed awake, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting. Hours crawled by. Then, just past 3, the figure appeared. He stepped from the tree line, his movements jerky, unnatural. Slowly he turned his head toward the camera, that smile splitting impossibly wide. Mia's breath caught as he raised a hand in a mocking wave. Then he leaned close to the lens, his hollow eyes staring directly into it. The camera flickered and went black. Mia lunged forward, unplugging it. Her hand shook violently, she couldn't breathe. The next morning, she played back what little the camera had captured. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. The children had opened the back door themselves, and then he appeared, stepping into the frame, his hands hovering just above their heads as if blessing them. When Mia confronted Daniel, he didn't deny it. His face was pale, tired. "He's claimed them," he said quietly. "The children belong to him now." Mia staggered back. "You knew. You let this happen." Tears filled his eyes, but his voice was steady. "There's no fighting him. I tried, when my wife was alive. He only takes what he wants." That night, Mia packed her bags, determined to leave, but as she wheeled her suitcase down the hall, she heard the children's laughter drifting from the yard. She peeked through the window. Ella and Sam were swinging, their faces blank, their heads tilted back toward the sky, and standing just behind them, towering and skeletal, the man grinned at her. Mia dropped her suitcase and backed away, her heart hammering. She realized then that the father had been right. The man in the garden would never stop, and he was watching her now. Story 4. The house that watches Clara had taken au pair jobs before, but none as strange as the posting in Germany. The advertisement described a historic family estate in the countryside, caring for 2 children in exchange for generous pay. The pictures showed a sprawling mansion with towering windows and ivy crawling up its stone walls. When she arrived, the house loomed even larger, its shadows stretching across the gravel drive. Herr and Frau Dietrich greeted her politely, their smiles tight, as though rehearsed. Their children, Greta and Lucas, were pale and serious, their eyes too old for their small faces. As Clara carried her suitcase up the grand staircase, she couldn't shake the feeling that the portraits on the walls were watching her. Painted ancestors lined the halls, their dark eyes following her steps. Her room was comfortable, but the first night was restless. The old house creaked and groaned constantly. Once she swore she heard faint breathing beside her bed, though no one was there. The next day, Greta tugged at her hand while they played. "You should be nice to the house," the little girl whispered. Clara smiled nervously. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "The house doesn't like strangers," Greta said matter-of-factly. "It makes them go away." Clara laughed it off, but unease coiled in her stomach. Over the following days, the oddities multiplied. Doors opened on their own, even when latched. Cold drafts swept through rooms with no open windows. At night, she would wake to find her bedroom door ajar, though she always locked it. One afternoon, while dusting the hallway, Clara glanced at a portrait of a stern-looking woman. She nearly dropped her rag. The eyes had shifted. Yesterday they had been painted looking to the right. Today, they gazed directly at her. She told herself she was imagining things. But when Lucas asked over dinner, "Do you hear it breathing too?" she nearly choked on her food. The parents ignored the comment, carrying on as if nothing had been said. That night, Clara woke again to the sound of breathing. It wasn't coming from beside her bed, it was the walls themselves, expanding and contracting, as though the house was alive. She pressed her hand against the plaster and felt a faint vibration, like a heartbeat. Her skin crawled. In the morning, she begged Frau Dietrich to explain what was happening. The woman's expression was cold. "You must not upset the children with your nonsense," she said sharply. "This is an old house. Old houses make noises." But the noises grew worse. Whispers followed Clara as she walked the halls, too faint to understand but always close to her ear. She began avoiding the portraits, yet sometimes she'd glimpse movement in the corners of her eyes, faces shifting, lips curling into faint smirks. One evening, while tucking Greta into bed, the girl whispered, "It's going to keep you." Clara froze. "What do you mean?" Greta only smiled and pulled the blanket over her head. Clara couldn't sleep. She decided she would leave in the morning, no matter how rude it seemed. But when she tried to pack, she found her suitcase missing. She searched the closet, under the bed, nothing. The suitcase was gone. Panic surged. She hurried to the front door, but when she tried to open it, the handle refused to turn. The locks clicked shut on their own. Windows rattled and slammed as she ran from room to room. The house was sealing her in. "Stop this," Clara shouted, her voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" The walls creaked in answer, the sound like a low groan. The portrait stared down at her, their eyes glinting with something almost human. She fled up the stairs, but the corridor stretched longer than before, extending impossibly into darkness. The children's laughter echoed from far away, distorted. Her breaths came in ragged gasps as she stumbled forward, only to find herself back where she started, standing before her locked bedroom door. She realized then, the house was playing with her. Summoning courage, she forced herself into the attic, hoping for another exit. The air was suffocatingly heavy, the wooden beams dripping with condensation. At the far end, she saw her missing suitcase, neatly placed on the floor. Relief rushed through her until she noticed the suitcase wasn't empty. Her belongings were arranged inside, perfectly folded. But on top sat something new, a framed portrait of her. Her blood froze. It was her, painted in the same style as the ancestors on the walls, her eyes dark and lifeless. Behind her, the attic door slammed shut. Clara screamed, clawing at the walls, but they pulsed beneath her hands like flesh. The whispers swelled into a chorus, chanting in languages she didn't understand. She pounded on the door until her fists bled, but the house only groaned contentedly, as if feeding on her fear. Downstairs, Herr and Frau Dietrich sat calmly in the parlor. Greta and Lucas played quietly with wooden blocks. "Will the house keep her?" Lucas asked. His father nodded. "It always does." Weeks later, another au pair arrived. She was shown to her room at the end of the hall where Clara's belongings had vanished. The portraits on the wall watched silently as the new girl carried her suitcase upstairs. And somewhere deep inside the house, Clara's muffled screams still echoed, swallowed into the walls that now bore her likeness forever. Story 5. The twins' secret. Anna had taken the job in Norway for the adventure. The family lived in a quaint wooden house on the edge of a fjord, its red paint bright against the snowy hills. The parents, Ingrid and Soren, seemed kind enough, though distant, and their twin daughters, Liv and Freya, were angelic in appearance, golden hair, pale eyes, delicate features. But Anna soon learned appearances could deceive. The girls were strange from the beginning. They rarely spoke to her, choosing instead to whisper to each other in a tongue Anna didn't recognize. It wasn't Norwegian, and it wasn't any language she'd heard before. The way they spoke in perfect unison, voices overlapping in eerie harmony, set her teeth on edge. One morning, while tidying their playroom, Anna found a circle of dolls arranged with meticulous care. Each doll's eyes had been gouged out with something sharp. The twins stood in the doorway, watching silently. When Anna asked why they'd done it, they only smiled. "Eyes are doors," Liv whispered. "Doors must stay closed." Freya finished. Anna laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, but unease coiled in her stomach. Soon, she noticed the animals, dead birds outside the windowsill, a rabbit carcass by the garden, its body twisted unnaturally. Even the family dog began whimpering whenever the twins entered a room. At night, Anna would hear footsteps padding down the hall, though the children were supposed to be asleep. Once, she caught them standing at the foot of her bed, holding hands in the moonlight. They didn't speak. They just stared until she whispered, "Go back to bed." Then they turned and walked away in perfect synchronization. The drawings came next. When Anna cleaned their playroom, she found dozens of papers covered in crude charcoal sketches, faceless figures towering over a small girl, circles with strange symbols inside, and black smudges where eyes should have been. She confronted Ingrid about it, but the woman only sighed. "They have unusual imaginations," she said. "Best not to interfere." One evening, Anna overheard Ingrid and Soren arguing in the kitchen. Their voices were low, urgent. "We promised them," Soren hissed. "We made the deal, we didn't know what it meant." Ingrid snapped back. "We can't let this continue." Anna pressed her ear closer to the door, her pulse hammering. The argument ended abruptly when she accidentally knocked over a glass. They fell silent, and when Ingrid noticed her, her eyes filled with something like guilt. The next day, Anna found the twins outside in the snow, barefoot and unbothered by the cold. They were chanting together, their voices rising in strange cadences. When she approached, they stopped and looked at her with identical smiles. "We need a new sister," they said in unison. Anna's skin crawled. "What do you mean?" "You," Freya whispered. "You'll do nicely," Liv finished. That night, Anna locked her bedroom door and pushed a chair against it. Sleep was impossible. She lay awake, heart racing, listening to faint whispers drifting through the house. At some point, exhaustion overtook her. She woke with a start to find her door wide open, the chair shoved aside. The twins stood in the doorway, their eyes black as oil. "You shouldn't lock the door," Liv said softly. "Sisters don't keep secrets," Freya added. Anna scrambled out of bed, her voice trembling. "Get out." The girls giggled, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to thicken, stretching toward her. The air grew heavy, charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. She grabbed her phone and flashlight, bolting down the stairs. The lights in the house flickered violently, then went out altogether. The only sound was the twins' laughter echoing from every direction at once. She ran to the front door and yanked the handle. Locked, she tried the windows, each one sealed shut, as if fused to the frame. Behind her, the twins' voices rose in unison, chanting words that made no sense but scraped against her ears like broken glass. The shadows twisted, forming shapes too tall, too thin, looming in the dark. Desperate, Anna fled into the basement. The air was damp, and the single bulb above her head flickered weakly. She pressed herself against the wall, praying they wouldn't follow. But the chanting grew louder. The twins appeared at the top of the stairs, their pale faces glowing in the dim light. "You'll be with us forever," they whispered together. "We'll never be alone again." The bulb above her exploded, plunging the basement into blackness. Something cold brushed against Anna's arm's small hands, gripping tight. She screamed, thrashing, but the darkness swallowed her voice. Upstairs, Ingrid and Soren sat at the kitchen table, staring into their untouched cups of coffee. The sound of Anna's screams rose through the floorboards, then faded into silence. Ingrid's hands shook. "How many more?" she whispered. Soren's face was pale. "As many as it takes." In the basement, the shadows settled. When the light flickered back to life hours later, the twins sat cross-legged on the floor, their hands clasped together, smiling sweetly. Between them was a third shadow, faint but unmistakable, its features forming slowly into Anus. Liv leaned close to her sister. "We have our new sister now," Freya giggled. "She'll never leave us." And in the stillness of the old house, a third voice joined their laughter.